Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of this new playlist where I am going to talk about mass transit in order to communicate from your applications, .NET applications with RabbitMQ. I don't know whether you have had a chance to take a look at my other playlist about RabbitMQ, but there is, a course on my channel about using RabbitMQ in .NET applications. If you haven't watched that course yet, please make sure you do that so you can, first watch the RabbitMQ course because that would really help you. Or you can watch that course at the same time that you are watching this course, because I believe that to better understand mass transit and to really appreciate mass transit, you first need to be able to understand RabbitMQ and work from your applications with RabbitMQ. Because mass transit is going to simplify many of the complexities that you no doubt encounter when you start working with RabbitMQ from your applications. So yeah, this is very important. I really want you to know a little bit about RabbitMQ before you take this course, before you watch these videos. With that out of the way, I need to tell you that, as you can see, I've got my RabbitMQ running on my local machine as a Docker container. So I'm running it on my local host, right? This is exactly the same setup that I had in that, RabbitMQ course. I've got my nodes here. I've got my RabbitMQ running as a Docker container, and I've got my Visual Studio here. So inside of Visual Studio, we are going to use, mass transit. We are going to talk about the different scenarios, the different features of mass transit, and we are going to implement them in console applications. And of course, we will start at the simplest level, very basic examples, and little by little, we will, talk about the more complex, complicated scenarios. And I want you to not only see the theoretical stuff in my notes to understand the concepts, but of course I want you to understand how to implement them. I think both of them are important. So both the notes, because there are some tips here, some stuff that I want to talk about in my notes, and then I'm going to take you to Visual Studio to implement them and talk about them. And of course, we're going to run our applications from Visual Studio to see them in action. So again, if you haven't watched that RabbitMQ course, I highly recommend that you do that. You don't need to stop watching this mass transit course here and then start watching the RabbitMQ course. That is not required. You can watch them at the same time, because what you learn in RabbitMQ is going to reinforce your learning in mass transit. And when you learn mass transit, you will see how mass transit is going to simplify a lot of complexities that exist when working directly with RabbitMQ. Anyway, let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about mass transit, and then we will see, the code in action. So mass transit is a .NET framework library that intends to simplify working with message brokers. In our case, right now, RabbitMQ is our message broker. So instead of doing everything manually, mass transit kind of helps you to focus more on defining the messages that you want to, send and receive your consumers, and your bus configuration, of course. So when I say bus configuration, I mean the let's say the bus, or the let's say the mechanism that allows you to communicate with RabbitMQ. So bus has a very, I think, let's say specific meaning here. I'm going to talk about that. So basically, as I said, yeah, mass transit aims to simplify a lot of stuff, aims to abstract a lot of stuff so that you can focus more on your business logic, on your business requirements, on defining your messages for consumers, and so on. So as I said, we are running RabbitMQ on our local host, as you can see, as a Docker container. When you do that, you can log into RabbitMQ using these, username and password thing, these credentials. And then, of course, we are going to create console applications. We are going to create two console applications for now, sender and receiver. Both of them are going to be console applications for now. As the name suggests, the sender is going to send some messages. The receiver is going to listen for some messages on the queue and then consume them, right? One very important thing before we get started is that we need to install these two packages inside of our applications. So inside of the sender and inside of the receiver, we are going to install MassTransit and MassTransit RabbitMQ NuGet packages. MassTransit because of course we're going to use MassTransit, and MassTransit RabbitMQ because our message broker is RabbitMQ. And then we can start defining our messages, our message contracts as they're sometimes called. So the message contracts are going to be shared among both of our applications. So the consumer and the sender, or the receiver and the sender. And to be able to share this single message contract between these applications, I am going to create a class library project, and I am going to create this interface inside of that. So as you can see right now, our message is very simple. It has one single property called text of type string. It is a read-only property. The message is of type interface. It is going to reside inside of the class library project that I told you, and that those two applications, the sender and receiver, will have references to that class library. So if you take a look here, let me show you. First off, I want to show you two important things. So first off, as you can see, the sender and the receiver have MassTransit and MassTransit RabbitMQ installed. These are the two NuGet packages. And again, both of these have references to that class library project, which I have decided to call contracts, right? So as I told you, this is going to be shared among our receivers and senders. And then inside of this, we are going to create our simple contract interface. So let me zoom in a bit and write the code. So as you can see, we've got this simple message contract, right? It's a simple interface called iTextMessage. And now, thanks to these project references, we are going to be able to use that interface not only from the sender, but also from the receiver. But before doing that, let's go to the notes one more time and see the next step. I want to take it really slowly in the first episode because I want you to be able to see everything in action, right? I want you to really see how things are going to, wire up so that you better understand the setup. So the next step is to create something called a consumer. So a consumer is a type, is a class that is going to be associated with that message type, with that interface. So it's going to be bound to that interface. This is inside the receiver application, of course. You can have as many consumers as you want. Of course, we are going to see that scenario with multiple consumers. But right now, we are going to create one single consumer. Take a look. The consumer is a type. You can call it whatever you want. You need to implement this interface coming from RabbitMQ, coming from MassTransit. It is called iConsumer. And then the type of the message that this consumer is going to handle. iTextMessage is the type that we just created, right? The interface. And then this interface gives you this single method. So inside of this method, you need to do whatever you want to do with that message, right? So you need to, I don't know, do whatever you want. In this case, as you can see, I am printing out the value inside of the message property coming from that interface to the console, and then I am returning task completed. One very important thing that I would like to talk about is the consume context type. So if you take a look at the consume method, I've got this type called consume context as the only parameter of the consume method. I think I've got a heading here for the consumer context. I have talked about this, I think, in one of these sections. Not here, I guess here, I'm not sure. But the consumer context, we're going to talk about the context as well. I mean, when we go to more complicated scenarios, but the context is the type that is going to provide many useful details for you. So I haven't put a note here for context. No worries. We are going to visit the context, the consume context again. But right now, just remember that in your consumer, if you want to get to the properties or the values of the message, you use the consume context and then the message property. So that gives you access to that instance of iText message in this case, and then you can, for example, read the text property. Now let's go to Visual Studio, and in the receiver application here, I want to write the code outside of this class, right? Inside of my namespace, I want to write the code for my consumer. So it's a simple type, implements iConsumer coming from MassTransit, and then of course we need to implement this single method. For now, we are only going to write the value of this property to console, and that's it. Let's go to the notes one more time, because the next step is to start using that, consumer, text message consumer. So this is the code for the receiver application. As you can see, first we are creating something called a bus control. So a bus control is going to allow us to be able to, communicate with our RabbitMQ through MassTransit. We are going to use this type called bus, the factory property, and then this method called create using RabbitMQ. Of course, our message broker in this case is RabbitMQ, so we are going to use create using RabbitMQ, and then you can configure this method with a lambda expression. So here, for example, you are specifying the credentials, username and password. You are specifying the host where RabbitMQ is running. You are specifying the virtual host of RabbitMQ. And then you are declaring something called a receive endpoint. So using the receive endpoint, you are creating a queue, and then you are using that consumer. So you've got this consumer, right? Text message consumer with this interface, with this method coming from the interface. Now take a look. You are creating a receive endpoint. You are specifying the name of the queue, and here, using this lambda expression, you are saying that my consumer is going to be this type, text message consumer. And this text message consumer, because it is a consumer, it has this consume method, right? So whenever a message arrives of type iText message, this specific consumer will pick up that message from this queue, right, and consume that. That's the easiest, way to get something from RabbitMQ and consume it. And then we are calling star async on our bus control. We are printing two messages to console, and then we are stopping the bus control. So I've got some, more detailed explanations here. As I told you, create using RabbitMQ. We are creating and configuring a bus instance coming from MassTransit using RabbitMQ and our broker as our broker. We are configuring it. You are configuring your connection to RabbitMQ. For example, you are saying to MassTransit how to connect to the broker, to RabbitMQ broker. It is running on our local host. / is the virtual host in RabbitMQ. It's like a namespace, for example, for message queues and so on. So the default is /. And then you are setting the credentials, username, password, guest. And then as I showed you, you are creating a receive endpoint. So the receive endpoint is very important. We're going to revisit receive endpoints again in future episodes. So this defines a receive endpoint, right? So it is like a message queue that MassTransit will listen to. And then you specify the name of the queue, and then using that lambda expression, you specify how to handle incoming messages by, for example, specifying the consumer. So you're telling MassTransit that, you know what, I've got a consumer called text message consumer, and it knows how to process those messages that are going to arrive in this queue. So use that consumer and its consume method to consume these messages. And MassTransit, of course, will automatically create, register the consumer, call its consume method coming from that interface whenever a new message arrives at that queue. And then you are starting the bus, right? Basically, you are connecting to RabbitMQ. You're listening for messages on that queue that you specify. So it's asynchronous, right? And it returns immediately after the startup is complete. And then when you are done, you're stopping it. It is going to shut down the connection through the bus, the connection to RabbitMQ. And of course, it ensures that any messages that are in the middle of, being sent, in-flight messages are finished processing before closing. So the next step for us is to start writing the sender application, right? So here, if you take a look, we haven't written the consumer yet. We need to write the consumer here. The receiver. We have written the consumer here, the receiver, and then we are going to talk about the sender. So let me write the code for the receiver now that we have talked about it. So it's going to be the same code I showed you. We need to create our bus control. We're going to configure it using the configuration lambda expression that we have. And then the next step is to create our receive endpoint. The receive endpoint is going to specify the consumer type, text message consumer. And then we are going to do what? We are going to start our bus control. We are going to write 2 messages to the console, as you can see. And then we are going to stop the bus control. And that's it. This is our receiver application. Now let's talk about the sender application. It is, I think, easier to understand compared to the receiver, and it is, of course, very similar. I'm not going to talk about the things that we have already covered in detail. So I want to move a little bit, I want to move a bit faster compared to the receiver application, but I really needed to talk about the, different things inside of the receiver application. But in the sender, as you can see, we are again creating our bus control using the same approach. We are starting the bus control, so we're connecting to RabbitMQ, and then we are prompting the user to create, to enter something, a piece of text, as the message that we want to send. And this is, I think, the most important part. We are, as you can see, using the bus control, we are using this publish method. We are specifying the type of the message, which is that interface iText message. We are creating an anonymous type, and we are setting the text property of that type to that text entered by the user. You see, the text that was entered by the user is captured in this variable. And then we are prompting again something to the console, and we are shutting down the bus control. Again, I have a detailed explanation here. I'm not going to talk about the things that we have already talked about. So this is the publish section, which is, I think, the meat of the sender application. This is the core of the publisher or the sender. It tells MassTransit to publish a message of type iText message, the interface that we defined, right? And then you're passing an anonymous object with a text property that matches the interface. And MassTransit uses message contracts by convention. It checks the anonymous object, and it checks whether that anonymous object matches the iText message interface, and then it publishes that message. The message is being sent, right, to the subscribers or the receivers in this case, and that receiver is the application that we just created. Now I want to take you to my Visual Studio window one more time, to the sender application, and I want to write the code for the sender application. So the sender is going to be very similar. This is how we create the bus control in order to be able to communicate with RabbitMQ, right? And then we do what? We start our bus control, and then we prompt the user to enter something. And then we read that something. We capture it in a variable. And then we publish it using the bus control, using the publish method, the anonymous type, the iText message interface. And then we are going to say that, you know what, the message was sent. And then we are going to shut down the bus control. That's it. That's our sender. Now that we've got our sender and we've got our, receiver, let's run these two applications. Here, inside of my notes, I have a section about how to run. So it is very, of course, easy. All you need to do is to have your RabbitMQ running locally, which I have here. You need to run the receiver to start listening, and then you run your consumer, or I'm sorry, your sender to send that message. And of course, you as a user will be able to enter a text for the message, and then you will see in the console the communication going on between these two. So here I've got two command prompts, right? In one of them, I am going to get to the sender. In the other one, I am going to get to the receiver. And here I want to run the receiver first. Now the receiver is going to run. It is going to listen on that queue. So it says receiver is running. Press any key to exit. And then the sender, .NET run. So it says enter message to send. Do you remember the prompt here, right? This is the prompt. Now we can enter anything that we want. I'm gonna, of course, type the name of my channel, Coder's Journey. Press enter. And it says message send, press any key to exit. And if you take a look at the receiver, it says received message, a Coder's Journey. And that's it. That's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned. I told you, this is the simplest example of having one sender, one receiver, one message, being sent between them. But there are so many other stuff that I have prepared for you. There are so many other exciting scenarios that we can implement using MassTransit in .NET, and they're coming up in future episodes. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share it with a friend. Leave a comment if you've got anything to say, and then stay tuned for the future episodes. Thank you very much for watching. See you later.